Joymarie Parker is joining me to dive deeper into that opportunity pillar. Joymarie is a consumer marketing lead and on the culture and community marketing team at Meta, where she has been at the helm of launching and developing campaigns that help push culture forward and drive brand relevance. Previously at Meta, she held roles in global business marketing, where she was part of the original team that created and launched Buy Black Friday, and has held roles at Spotify, American Express, and the McCann World Group. Her specialties include integrated marketing, storytelling, large and small scale experiential and events, sponsorship and partnership, and creator marketing. She's also the co-host of Job Logs, a career podcast for multicultural professionals that has been featured by Essence Fest, Elle, Refinery 29, Forbes, Entrepreneur, and partnered with brands like Walmart, American Express, and One United Bank. So she's a big deal, y'all, okay? Yes, yes. All right, please join me in welcoming Joymarie Parker to the Fireside Chat. Let's have Joymarie go ahead and share with us in your own words. I read the beautiful bio, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, thank you so much, Michaela, Kelly, the whole team for having me. It's been such a privilege, like all the other speakers said this morning. I was really inspired by the youth panel, Antonio, who used to be our CMO, Kenny, who I know back from my New York days. So it's just been a really incredible morning. But as far as, what's not in my bio, I think faith is central to who I am. Prayer is part of my business strategy. So while I've accomplished a lot, I credit a lot of that as favor and just God's favor on my life. Beyond that, I mean, I grew up kind of a global citizen. My parents immigrated here in the 70s to Chicago. Ghanaian heritage, shout outs to any of my West Africans or Africans in the house. But that really shaped who I am and my identity. They really put themselves through school, through college. My dad worked for the United Nations supporting refugees for 35 years, so we traveled and moved all over the world and lived in different countries. And I think that has always given me perspective and a lens on who I am and what my impact is in the world, because as great as all this marketing stuff is, it's not saving lives. So just seeing the resilience of people in countries like Tanzania and Rwanda to be able to just rehabilitate their lives from nothing, from war and poverty, has been incredible, and create opportunities where no opportunities exist. So that's what's shaped me. That's who I am. I'm an artist at heart. I'm sort of a college dropout. I left, I failed, I did miserable, and then kind of just redefined my career and hustled from the ground up. But yeah, that's me.
I love it. Okay, and so speaking of your artistry, let's watch a little bit of that work now, hopefully with sound.
It's okay. Imagine it. There we go.
Okay, all the vibes, yes, yes. Feel like we're waking up from lunch, so that was good. Okay, so we've been talking all day about four pillars, right? Exposure, access, opportunity, and equity. And as a Black woman who has worked in some of the largest tech companies, before we go deep into the opportunity pillar, tell me a little bit more on your thoughts on those four pillars and how they have impacted your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone has said all morning, those pillars are my life. I mean, what you're exposed to shapes what you aspire to, what you think is possible for your life. But at the same time, when I was an undergrad, I went to school to be a designer, an artist, like digital design, website design, things like that. I've always been creative at heart. And so I've always been a visionary. Are there any like creatives in the house, photography? Visionaries, graphic designers, yeah. So I've always been very creative, and as a creative, our skill set is the ability to create something out of nothing. And so I think while exposure is important, there's this tension of like what is possible, and then sometimes the resources available or the connections and network available to actually make it happen. And so for me, really finding kind of my footing and figuring out after kind of like flunking out of school and then just entering the workforce as a freelance designer in New York City around the time of the recession, figuring out, okay, well, I don't want to be a professional artist. And marketing is a space where you kind of bring the art and the science together, and there's that stability, but needed to build a network in order to do that. And so as a emerging, designer in New York, just finding associations like the 4As, the American Association of Advertising Agencies, working there, supporting their multicultural advertising intern program, then building connections with a lot of chief diversity officers that were members of the association, segueing into a role at McCann World Group, supporting their internal diversity and inclusion initiatives, and then using a connection from the alumni network to land my first contract freelance or temp role at American Express before transitioning into full-time. My whole career has been about like connections and access and opportunities that have been given to me through that networking, through that exposure. And so it really is core to who I am and what I believe. But I think the other thing, and Antonio touched on this, is like, I couldn't have articulated the career I'm in 10 years ago because it didn't exist. And with new technologies, with emerging technologies, you don't necessarily need to feel like you have a grip on what you want to do because you don't know where like the industry is moving, where consumer behaviors are shifting. But when you can start to articulate and identify that common theme, and for me, it was the storytelling around culture, whether inside or outside of my job, through my podcast, through other avenues, you start to see the through lines that then create additional opportunities and inbound opportunities that come your way as well. So very, very passionate about all four pillars and love that that is core to the focus of the BrandLab.
Yeah, so you mentioned tension, right? And I think that's a very real thing that probably everybody has felt in this room at some point. What's some of the self-talk things that you tell yourself to move through that?
Through tension?
Yeah, just in not knowing that next move that you're going to make, that next opportunity.
I think it's that you do it anyway. I mean, there was nervousness coming up here, but as you start to do things that you're uncomfortable with, you remember that you get through it. There's always another side to it, and that kind of becomes the confidence. We were talking about confidence earlier. Do things afraid anyway, because you don't know what opportunities can exist from exploring intersections. So an example, the podcast. That was something that I just did, honestly, when I moved to New York. I considered myself jobless. I had a blog called Jobless in the City. I had freelance jobs. I always had a job. But to me, my ambition, because of what was dictated around me, was to have a full-time salaried job with benefits. And until I did that, I kind of felt like, oh, I'm trying to break in. And it was really, really tough to network and try to land these roles. I was applying online, hundreds and hundreds of jobs, not getting them. Freelancing in New York City. New York is expensive, trying to afford the rent. And started this blog. And actually, when I was at American Express as a contract worker, one of my colleagues was like, you should turn that into a podcast. And I'd never thought about that. And so she was like, I actually have a sound engineer that's a friend of mine that I'll introduce you to. So she introduced me to the sound engineer. we mapped out the show, started doing it, started getting feelers, bringing on guests. We had Morgan DeBon from Blavity and tons of really incredible entrepreneurs and innovators join the show, as well as professionals in corporate. And the show was really themed around like candid career conversations with your group chat girlfriends. So me and my childhood best friend did it. We would just explore all of these different fun challenges, tensions around entering the workforce. But through that, I mention it because through that, other professional opportunities came my way. Like Amex then asked me to do a live show of the podcast as part of their Black History Month programming. And we got sponsorship opportunities from Walmart. And I was able to leverage that storytelling skill set over the 4 years to then pitch a podcast boot camp for women of color to Spotify, to a director at Spotify who sponsored it, did it, and they turned that into a global incubator program they have called Sound Up Boot Camp that helps to actually fund podcasters of color or minorities all over the world. And so I just say that to say, like, you don't know when you're doing things what will come of them later. I mean, I don't think I would have ever imagined like the podcast would shape my appetite for culture storytelling or provide me with career opportunities I didn't know exist, but it did. So
I love that. The path is never linear, right?
yeah.
So you touched on the opportunity that you got. You even sounds like created opportunities for others. Has there ever been a time where you did not get an opportunity?
Oh, all the time. I don't get opportunities all the time, but you still shoot the shot, right? I think we really as a culture need to embrace more of the idea of failure, because failure helps you to learn and optimize. And so, I mean, I think just again, that those early stages of my career, trying to break in, not getting a ton of opportunities, that would be like the example, just like literally hundreds and hundreds of roles, hundreds and hundreds of no's, but just forging my own path. And I think what that helped me to do was bring a entrepreneur spirit, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, to every role that I do have, where even within a job, even in my current role at Meta and Instagram, my role is really focused on identifying consumer trends, insights, behaviors, sparks in culture, and then building net new ideas out of that. And so I don't have a manager telling me, oh, like next month you need to build XYZ program or activation. It is truly about proactively seeing a need in the community. So as an example, in 2021, Summer Olympics, I don't know if y'all remember, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, they started to speak up around mental health and boundary setting, and we saw sparks and trends online on our platform, conversations specifically with Black women, but women of color, just around saying no. They were labeling November as no-vember, and boundary setting. And so we took the opportunity to develop a campaign called It's Okay to Not, that really was centered on empowering women of color to self-advocate, to set boundaries, to say no. We did a 6-hour live stream on our @creators handle with really incredible mental health experts, Tabitha Brown, Zaya Wade, tons and tons of folks, young, across generational lines, and empowered them through this hybrid program. So online, but also in person. We had Elsa Majimbo come out to the studio and just built a program around that. And that turned into and scaled into a platform we've activated like 6 or 7 times since then through different well-being camps, Mental Health Awareness Month last year, Polaroid mailers, just encouraging people to take a break from the platform and care for their mental health. And so I think just an example of like, there may not be an opportunity or there might be a no, but there are still ways to create, identify, and advocate for the things that that you believe in. And I think it's so nice to show these sizzles and flex about all the work you've done, but the reality is it's very difficult in many corporations to advocate for this type of work because people haven't seen it before and they don't necessarily understand the value of it. And that used to discourage me a lot earlier in my career, but as you push the wins and you push the work through, as people see the success of it, that makes the yes easier later down the line. So it's tough to break ground when something hasn't been done before, and I don't want to gloss over that and act like it's super easy. It's a lot of managing up, a lot of advocating, a lot of being immersed enough in culture to understand and point to signals that you truly are passionate and believe in, but definitely worth it.
So good. I feel like what you mentioned and just what Kenny shared earlier is that listening part, right? Listening and then leveraging to take action. Okay, so I was, kind of today years old when I found out that according to HubSpot, 85% of jobs are filled through networking, right? So like being in this room is really important, but can you share a little bit more about like how networking has, impacted your career journey, what that has looked like for you?
Yeah, so earlier, when I was more entry level trying to break in, it was like a full-time job. It's like I'm going to all the happy hours, I'm going to all the networking events, I'm meeting all the people, I'm exchanging all the information. And I think that was fine. But I so admire forums and spaces like this, like in the youth panel. I'm so impressed by you putting in that time and effort to be in spaces like this, to enlist in programs like this, because it just makes it so much easier. So I do think a number of trade associations, I mentioned the 4As, have been beneficial. Earlier in my career, I built relationships with AdColor, AAF, Most Promising Minority Student programs. I volunteered with America Needs You. That's a 2-year mentor coach program for first generation college students. And so my challenge to more so the leaders and executives in the room is ensuring that you're also getting out of your own bubble and comfort zone to really be engaged with programs like this, and not just at a lip service level, but truly spending your time, whether that's resources, investing, but also just like being available, making yourself available. I used to do like Friday office hours and just open up my calendar to people to get time with me. But it's those associations, but it's also the stuff outside of that. I talked about intersections earlier. I serve at my church quite actively. I lead our digital team. We do social media, video, all of that. And I've learned more. I hope my employer isn't watching this, but I've learned more there about like producing epic reels and video that I actually bring back to my work. And so thinking about the things that you're naturally passionate about and are good at, and how you can just do more of what's fun to you that makes you a better professional. I'm part of a sorority from college, and so that network, my alumni network from school, these are all things that play together. Maintaining positive relationships with past employers. I'm not that great at that, but I would say also peers. So peer sets are super underrated. I would say my network is majority peer-based versus more senior like mentors and sponsors. I do have sponsors, but that honestly hasn't been an area I've invested a lot of effort and time in, but my peer set is incredible. I mean, you've been in the workforce X number of years, and it just kind of compounds over time, where friends from college are now the people that are hiring managers and making these decisions. And so it is really important to just maintain a really diverse peer set. My peer set is everything from corporate folks like me to entrepreneurs, creators, innovators. I've got friends that own menswear fashion lines, or a stylist, just styled at the Met Gala. And so I like to keep my peer set also super diverse and creative, because a lot of the interesting opportunities and intersections, like the reel y'all watched was Meta House 2022 at Art Basel, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, but that really came from in 2021, my manager was like, we have a surplus of money at Q4, you gotta spend it, if anyone knows about that. So gotta spend it, let's do something sexy. That's what she said to me, let's do something sexy. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try to get a house, let's curate some DJs, get some performers. I had agency relationships with agencies that I knew did really, really incredible culture forward work with the Nikes of the world. We'd done Joe Freshgood's Complex Con, Chicago-based streetwear designer, activation at Complex Con, and they killed it. So I was like, I'm gonna call them, we've got 3 weeks, can you do this for me? And they said yes. And so we just all made it happen in 2021, went down to Miami, booked a pool house, brought in Quavo and Baby Tate and a really awesome lineup of DJs, gave people a fun entertainment experience just around the theme of just reprieve from how hectic Art Basel is. And it was our first time there, and it was such a blowout success that my company asked me to do that again in 2022, but this time with Meta as the focus. And If anyone knows the sentiment around Facebook isn't always that positive. Not everyone loves us. And so with the Meta rebrand, the challenge was how do we bring this innovation, metaverse, VR, AR conversation to Basel in a really fun and compelling way. In 2021, it was Casa Instagram. In 2022, it's Meta. And so, we brought back the same agency and did that. And I think it's just those types of things that just finding those kinds of opportunities. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, you dropped so many gems, and the surplus, make it sexy, went down to Miami. I mean, yes, that's great. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that Joymarie said that her peer group has been her strongest network. So I think that's something that we really try to push with the fellows. And I'm seeing them right in front of me here. Like, y'all have each other, right? So often we're looking up instead of looking next to who's doing the work with us. And so I feel like that's major key and something that hopefully you take with you when you leave the space. Okay, transitioning to some of the work that you've done. I mean, we just chatted a bit about it, but would love for you to share if there was anything else about that Meta House launch, right? So it was a mixed reality experience. So what you saw there, right? VR art gallery, interactive AR murals, VR sculpting workshops that featured a variety of artists. And so this is really moving towards the future, right? Tell us a little bit more about, how you got that opportunity and what that looks like for you in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one thing I can do is just define what culture and community marketing is. And so it was a relatively new team to Instagram in 2021. My boss, Michelle James, MJ James, she's New York based, came into the company to start and found the team. And taking a couple steps back from that, mentioned Spotify, Amex, and Facebook. I joined Facebook in 2019 on the B2B, business to business marketing side. So my role in my career has always been more so enterprise facing and thinking about how to support our ads business and tell that narrative to sales teams. But in 2020, obviously, with everything that happened with Black Lives Matter, there was an opportunity to just support small Black-owned businesses who were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic at a larger rate, like 40% of them had to shut down. And so we have kind of a hackathon innovation culture at Facebook, at Meta. And so just signed up for this hackathon to support Black small businesses. And honestly, the sign-up list was closed. I just kind of forged my way in, create opportunities. So I finessed my way onto the team. We had they had a whole structure around it. So there were like 20 different teams with different global challenges. Ours was to support small Black businesses. And so we just spent a couple of weeks brainstorming things we could do. And inspired by Insecure, how many people watch Insecure? The block party with Issa, we were like, let's do like a virtual block party. So that's how Buy Black Friday was started. And I, again, finessed my way into driving the show because of the podcast. I was like, I will manage the TV show. I'll build out a whole like content plan. We'll do 5 weekly episodes on Fridays leading up to Black Friday. And then we'll just rebrand Black Friday as Buy Black Friday. And so that was the whole premise. Finessed my way, got to really, based off of things that I've consumed, like Essence Fest online, I was like, let's build this multi-segment style show where there's live shopping, there's interviews, there's creators, and we're just like putting them on. And so got to really fund and work with over 80 Black businesses and creators, Gabrielle Union, Miguel, her. It was really, really incredible. But that was all just me pitching, advocating, and like taking the reins. And honestly, that was such a tough project because there was a whole team already in place to work on the show, and I just kind of like bulldozed my way in and was like, I'm doing it now. But out of that success, like that went all the way up to Sheryl Sandberg, who was our COO at the time, and she said it was like one of the best programs she'd seen in her 9 years at the company. But leveraging that, I saw that there was a new VP of marketing at Instagram, and so coming out of that experience, getting the highest rating that you can get at the company, which was nice, nice bonus, all of that. I was like, what else? Where do I go now in my career? I feel like I've kind of peaked with the business marketing thing and I'm not learning and growing. And so just slid into her DMs essentially, and which was kind of inappropriate, but I did it anyway. But I was like, hey CMO, like I'm Joymarie, can I grab time on your calendar? I'm just interested. I worked on by Black Friday, interested in what you're building over here. And so the conversation, she was so generous and kind. Because again, it was like I was wasting her time. She was like, talk to my team. But she was so kind to just tell me she was hiring a director who's now my boss. And so when she hired the director, I saw the update on LinkedIn and applied for the role and got it, kind of leveraging the Buy Black Friday experience. But the team and the remit was really around supporting communities of color specifically, so LGBTQ+, Black, Brown, Latinx, and our API communities, and really building programs and campaigns at the speed of culture that help to make our brand relevant, but also centered them. And so, this is my work, but my team has done really, really cool stuff like, it's API Heritage Month right now. They've done Gold House Gala partnerships and things like that, Frequency Brown programs to support the API community. They've done We the Culture, which is our program that supports the Black community, or Dale 2 that does the Latinx community. And so a lot of really cool work coming out of the team, and that's kind of the focus and the remit, but we were designed for that. So I share that just as the context and background around sort of what the goals were. Now those have shifted and evolved. We think now a lot about what's happening with teens and Gen Z and younger generations, which I love the youth panel, but those needs and behaviors are so different from what a lot of traditional marketers are used to. And so our whole focus is really how do we look at insights and trends, and how do we look at behaviors and the conversation's already happening. We don't need to create them as a brand, but how do we amplify them? How do we give others opportunity to be heard and be visible? And so a lot of the examples you hear, really our strategy is like, how do we underwrite or fund or just amplify, get press for these creators, feature them on our editorial handles, give them the funding to do what they would do if they had the funding to do it, right? To connect their own communities and have these important conversations. So that's like a big part of the approach and what culture and community marketing is really built on.
No, thank you for like setting that table and sharing that definition. You just talked so heavy up here, name dropping and all this stuff, but I don't want to gloss over. You said it was hard work, and the fact that you did the work first, and that your work, led you in the room, right? You planted some seeds and then you slid into the DMs, so everybody up in here who is looking to connect with somebody, I feel like that might happen after, but.
Which, just to build on that a little bit, to me, that is such a underrated lever for creating opportunity. And you don't have to have like, we talk about transactional networking, but my hot take is it's okay to be transactional sometimes if you have the credentials to back it up.
Okay.
So I can slide in someone's DM and say like, oh, I'm Joymarie, I work at Instagram, I'm interested in chatting with you about an opportunity. They will likely open it and respond to me. You don't have to work at an Instagram. You can say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I've created XYZ, or I'm building this business, or I'm passionate about this form of advocacy. And a lot of times people will respond to you based off of either the opportunity that they might be interested in, or just the credentials that you have. And so I would say like lean on that stuff. That's what these networks are for. Like being affiliated with this gets you more access than maybe just using your own name, right? You can have conversations and say, I was at the BrandLab Fearless conference and, interested in XYZ, and that will start a conversation. And so I think like I'd rather try and shoot your shot than not. That's my kind of approach. Just try. If it doesn't work, you have nothing to lose, but closed mouths don't get fed.
That part, okay, yes. Yeah, we can clap for that. So being the co-host of Job Logs, right, a career podcast, was one of those like seeds that you planted that you were able to leverage and sounds like discover more out about yourself, right? Like I like doing this thing, I want to do more of this thing. And so it's fair to say that your network kind of maybe played a big part in helping you to kind of create that opportunity and see that opportunity for yourself. How do you believe that the things that you create for yourself outside of your work will impact how you show up and how you can build that work?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it already today. One, it makes you a better, more well-rounded human. it's easy to do these conversations and just like talk about this stuff like it's easy, but I've dealt with imposter syndrome and feeling insecure and defeated and not knowing if I was good enough. I've dealt with, racial discrimination from managers and bosses and people that I trusted, and not feeling psychologically safe. But all of that helped to build such a confidence in who I am. And when I balance my life with church, with family, with podcasting, with hanging out with friends. I just was at my best friend's bachelorette in Joshua Tree, which was so fun. It makes me feel more confident because my identity is not tied up solely in my 9 to 5. And so when something goes wrong in that area, that's not who I am. That's not how I see myself anymore. But there have been seasons that I did, and that took me down. And I think I needed to experience those to set my own boundaries around, like, never again. I'm never going to let a job make me feel bad about myself because I know I'm the shit.
We agree. We think you're the shit too. So yes. In addition to the entrepreneur that you are with the podcast, right? We talked about being the entrepreneur in the work that you've done at Spotify and Meta. So you alluded to that earlier. But entrepreneur being defined as like a manager within a company who promotes innovative product development and marketing. Is that like how you would define it? How did you start exploring that for yourself?
I don't think I did. I mean, I loved when you wrote it like that, but like I'd never called myself that. But it is true that I think is my sweet spot. There's a couple of things. One, you got to be really, really, really good at what you do, period. That's the baseline. I think we all have talked about that, and we're all on the same page there. So consistency proven over time, I think, gives you the space to then be able to play with innovation. But I also think you have to very deeply be invested and understand the business challenges and what you're trying to solve for. And so, yes, I am hyper passionate about communities of color and amplifying stories of people that usually don't get to share their story. And so I bring that lens into every conversation and meeting. But if I were to only enter a meeting at work advocating for that, I might not be well received if I'm not connecting that back to value for the business. And so I think understanding the products, understanding the goals and the vision, and being able to connect what you're passionate about to how that benefits the company is critical when you are in a corporate environment. Now, when you're working for yourself, you can solely focus on the mission and the passion, but you have to be able to connect the dots. And I think, earlier in my career, I went from designing to doing a lot of events for American Express. We do like over 20 events a year. So I started to see this playbook. It's just a formula. It's kind of rinse and repeat, right, for events. Bring a dope group of people together like this, organize it really well. I know you're probably like, this was a lot of work, and it was. It's always a lot of work, but there's a formula you can rinse and repeat, but the secret sauce to me is the curation. It's not just the execution, it's the curation. And so how are you thinking thoughtfully about the creators that you're featuring in a marketing campaign? How are you thinking about the stories that you're telling, whose voices you're elevating and amplifying? How are you thinking about the guest list of who's in the room so that they can create connections with each other? And I started to see that entrepreneurship and creating opportunities for myself and others professionally was less about me being so tactical and in the weeds. I had to kind of transition from an individual contributor to a leader, where now it's about what agency partners do I know can get the job done? Who are the young people that are the future of tomorrow, and can I recommend them, or do I know who to go to that can recommend them? So I don't have to have all the answers, but I can go to you, I can go to Kelly, y'all can give me a list of hundreds of people that I can put on, that I can leverage for something. Who, even internally, who are the players that I need to elevate something from good to great? And so 2021 Costa Instagram, tons of fun. We didn't get any press for that though. And so what that was essentially just an event. 2022, when we were approaching from a meta perspective and increasing the investment, I needed to make sure I brought on my product teams to display our AR, VR capabilities. I needed to make sure that I partnered with our comms teams. And this is all internal pitching. Like, these teams have their own roadmaps and priorities. So they're not thinking about, my Meta House event. They're like so busy with a bunch of other things. So I have to come to them and build the business case for why they should give me resourcing and time and pitch outlets for what I'm building, and also meet their priorities. So it's a lot of compromising, a lot of managing up, a lot of decks and putting strategy together that connects back to the business. A lot of internal collaboration, tons and tons of internal collaboration. All those creators and celebrities either came through an agency or partnerships teams. And so, yeah, it's a lot of, it's less of the fun stuff that people think it is, and a lot more strategy, a lot more thinking about how things can scale, especially as a consumer marketer, because our remit is to reach millions, not the hundreds in the room.
Very good. So I want to make sure I'm being mindful of time, because I feel like Joymarie's given us a wealth of knowledge already, and want to open it up for questions. So we'll take some questions from folks in the room and some from the Barkley Watch Party online. So go ahead and make yourself known, raise your hand or stand if you have a question for Joymarie.
You touched on imposter syndrome, and as a young professional entering the workforce, how do you feel you can overcome this, as well as understanding your ideas are important, even though you might not have the time that others do at the company?
Sorry, what was the last part?
Oh, sorry. Understanding your ideas are important, even though you may not have the time that others do at the company.
Like time as in like just been there long enough?
Yes.
Okay, so the first part, overcoming imposter syndrome, I think it's just over time, experience, practice, doing it scared anyway. And the more you do it, the more you build the muscle of like, even if I feel like I don't belong, which sometimes I do, my ideas are good, they matter, I've had success in the past. Sometimes the wins that I reference to give myself a boost of confidence aren't the wins from work, they're wins from the podcast or the wins from, you know, other areas of my life. And so that's why, again, I think it's important to be so well-rounded. But also sometimes with imposter syndrome, I think, especially entry level and people of color, communities of color, one thing I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for is just like our cultural consumption. Like, what are you watching on TikTok? You know, what TV shows have you watched? Who's the next emerging creator or person that we should know about? A lot of times that's value that you can bring into a setting, or asking the right questions. I used to get that feedback a lot earlier in my career. You ask really good strategic questions. You don't have to know the answers, just ask smart questions. So there's lots of different ways to build confidence and not feel like an imposter. And even if you feel like one, just keep practicing, it gets better. To the second part of the question, was it advocating for ideas when you haven't had a lot of tenure? I think tenure is interesting at a company, but to me, I know my idea is hot whether or not I've been at the company a long time. Being at the company at a long time just tells me how to pitch that idea within that climate, right? So at Meta, I know they need a go-to-market deck. It's just the culture. If they don't see it in a deck with slides talking about the, you know, objective, and it just is, you're not going to be able to sell it. I can't just have a conversation and be like, I have this really great idea. So I have to speak the language of the people around me. At Spotify, it was a little bit different. I could just call somebody up and be like, let's do this. And they'd be like, yes, that's hot, let's do it. But you have to know and speak the language of the environment you're in. So it takes some observation, and don't resist that part of it. When you resist that, like, and sometimes I have tried to resist it, like bringing in a bunch of internal collaborators. I've tried to just like, I could just do it on my own. I have the budget and the agency relationship, I'll just get it done. That doesn't go over well with leadership, because they want to see, how have you made sure you integrated this idea with our product teams, with our comms teams, with our editorial teams, you know? You don't get a pat on the back for doing it solo. So just understanding and knowing the climate of where you're trying to push work through is important.
Very good. We have another question up front, and then if we're ready we'll go to online next. Question right here.
So you spoke a lot about sponsorship early on, and I'm just curious if you can speak a little bit about how allyship has played a role in getting to where you've gotten to.
Oh, it's like critical, super, super critical. I think my last two managers have been really incredible advocates of my career, and have been, you know, they just go to bat for me behind the scenes. I've been able to get promoted, I've been able to get really high ratings, I've been able to have success, and get the yeses ultimately on the work that I'm pitching through their support. And it's interesting because it's not always, you got to figure out what's important to you. After a really terrible experience a couple years ago with a manager, or not a manager, my manager kind of quit. She hired me, quit, got another job, and then I ended up rolling into another director. And that was quite a debilitating experience for me that really eroded my confidence until eventually it just got to the point where I was like, look, you're either gonna fire me or you're not, but I'm staying. And then I got a new job. So that experience showed me that I need to optimize for what's important to me, and what's important to me is psychological safety and trust. I don't so much need a manager to tell me what to do or give me the ideas or like coach me on my career, because I can get that from other places. I need a manager who is effective with her leadership team, his or her leadership team, to be able to push things through, advocate for the team, get budget, get resources, and then let me fly. And so I think you have to know what that is for you, and what is critical to your career success. And also there are seasons, right, in your career. And so there were seasons where I was heads down doing the work, and that's great. But opportunity also comes from visibility. And actually, my manager is the one who kind of pushed me to start doing these speaking engagements and things like that, because she, you know, the work is good. I make her look really great, which she loves. The more you can make your team look great, the more opportunities you get. So, and not just with this type of work, I make her look good by connecting her to resources that I had in business marketing that we don't have in consumer marketing, explaining to her like, oh, there's this industry marketing team. In fact, she's at the IAB New Fronts today, right now, speaking through a connection that I connected her with. And so there are ways that you can get creative about that. But yeah, I think just figuring out what your values are, what's important to you, and then also paying attention to the seasons. And it's okay if in one season it's one value and in the next season it's a different one.
Wonderful. We're going to go to a question online.
Thank you. So our question online is, you mentioned building campaigns at the speed of culture. Can you tell us a bit more about how to tap into that and how those either entrepreneurs or businesses, agencies can do that?
What was the last part?
How can entrepreneurs, individuals, businesses, how can they tap into that and move their campaigns at the speed of culture?
Yeah, I think actually entrepreneurs and businesses can do it a little bit more effectively than large corporations, because there's just so many matrixed, teams and things like that that you have to get through at bigger corporations. But I think one, to move at the speed of culture, you have to know what's happening in culture. Kenny touched on that. Most folks don't, because you're either like consuming as an outsider, or it's sort of transactional in that you kind of want to capitalize on a moment. You got to really be in it or partner with people who are in it. And so my approach is to really center, the communities and the folks that are doing the work, that are in it, that are consuming it. But I think, yeah, it's one, understanding what's going on. And so figuring out how you're gonna know what those signals are. For us, we work a lot with really youth resonant firms, like research firms. Juve Consulting is a great example, Gen Z run firm by Ziad Ahmed. If y'all don't know him, look it up, they're incredible. But they tell us like, here's what's happening, here's what we're hearing and seeing, here's what our own Gen Z team feels about these topics. And so one, you gotta understand what's going on. We also have a huge just appetite for what's happening in the world. We have our own like Instagram groups and chats where we're always pinging each other, like, did you see this look from the Met Gala? Here's the behind the scenes thing happening here. Did you see the interpreter from Rihanna's Super Bowl performance? Like, can we get in touch with her? So just knowing what's going on and not being late to the party. We focus a lot not just on established trends that are mainstream, but really the emerging behaviors and what that's signaling to us. So, if you're on TikTok, and this is late at this point, but aesthetics is a big thing. These aesthetic trends, whether it's royalty core or princess core. Last year, Bridgerton, the new season came out. And so we were just seeing a spike in women of color who typically have been erased from those types of movies, films, and images, dressing up and taking on these personas of royalty and princess core looks and having tea parties. And And so we partnered with Netflix and created an opportunity to feature them in a press article and invite them to the Bridgerton Ball and things like that. And so you got to know what's happening, and then you got to be able to activate quickly. The quick activation part requires a couple of pieces. In my experience, and depending on what your goals are, it's just one, being able to move. So if you want to do something experientially, like event-wise, do you have the resources in place so that when something happens, you can just like deploy them quickly? You don't want to be trying to figure out how to do it after the moment, because you're going to be too late. And so whether it's like editorial, social resources, PR, comms resources, event resources, you almost have to build kind of an infrastructure. And I think social is a really, really effective way to move quickly on what's happening in culture. Instagram, other platforms. But yeah, just figuring out like, how do you want to execute? What are the signals? How do you pay attention to them? And what also is like, makes sense for your brand or business. It's so cringe when certain brands like jump in on a conversation and you know they don't belong. So you don't want to be that person either.
Yeah, don't be that person. Okay, one last question over here.
Hi. Whoa, sorry. I'm newly entering into the creative space, and something that I found, and you probably recognize as someone of color, is the difference in the way that we're perceived when we speak. When trying to introduce an idea or a format or any type of plan, we run the risk of being heard incorrectly or heard as brass or cocky. How have you been able to circumvent that, bearing in mind that you have the credentials now to be confident? But how did you circumvent that in the beginning?
I don't think I have. That's such a great question. I don't think I have, and I still see that tension. I see it all the time. But I think what's cool about now having transitioned to consumer marketing versus business marketing is the culture tells you what they want. I don't get to be at Instagram or Meta and say, we should do this. Like, you literally, culture is telling you. And so when we're bringing a Glorilla or you're looking at Ice Spice's emergence, like, that's what the people want. So you got to give them what they want. And I tend to tap into that to say, well, this is, consumers want this. Like, audiences want authenticity. People are so fed up with polished images. I love how the younger generation is just pushing us away from, you know, the polish and the finesse and the big brand campaigns, and just connecting on a more real level. And so, yeah, that's a personal point of view of mine, but I also get to point to consumer data and consumption behavior and say, well, if you want to be successful as a brand, it's not about what celebrity you want to put on, it's about what the people want to hear, right? So I think point to what's happening in culture. Communities of color are, underrepresented communities are disproportionately communities pushing culture forward on our platforms. Like, it's a fact, right? If you look at TikTok, if you look at Instagram, like, these are the creators that are setting trends that the rest of us are following suit on. And so that is the reality, whether or not we like it. And so I tend to lean on that. It's not always received well. It doesn't always translate to internally who gets to be heard. And so I tend to coach a lot of folks who I see struggling with that, and I have as well, on like, okay, be yourself 100%, but it's like I talked about with the decks and stuff. You got to communicate in a way that the environment understands. For the season that you're here, you got to optimize for what your goal is. If you're trying to win here, you have to kind of adapt to certain things. Go off and do your own thing, or create your own group chats, create your own safe spaces where you can vent about the bullshit on your own. But you got to play the long game and figure out, like, how can I win here, you know, in the climate that exists, and then you can advocate for change. But it's hard when you're on the outside to make a difference.
Okay, so good. All right, Joymarie's going to be hanging around for happy hour after, so if you didn't get a question, or you didn't get to ask a question, connect with her then. But let's give a big round of applause for Joymarie.